All right, here we're looking at Chapter 1, Section 4. And in this section, we're going to be dealing with circles and graphing them. Okay, so our learning targets for today, we're going to write the standard form of the equation of a circle. And then we're going to graph a circle in different forms. And then finally, we're going to work with the general form of the equation of a circle and how we can go back and forth between those two forms. Okay, so first we're dealing with the standard form of the circle. So here I have my h and k. H and k is the center of my circle, and my radius r is going to be how far from the center to all of the points on that circle. All right, so here's the standard form of an equation of a circle. So I have my x minus h, the quantity, squared, plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Okay, so just the big things to remember here is that it's x minus h and y minus k. That's always going to kind of be the case, so make sure you always have those minus signs in there. Okay, so now I also know that if my circle is centered at the origin, that means my h and k are 0, so I end up with more simplified, right? X squared plus y squared equals r squared. All I did was instead of an h and a k, I put in a 0, so those can go away, right? So that's just if I'm at the origin. Okay. We're also going to be using the unit circle pretty often in this class. So the unit circle is literally our circle centered at the origin with a radius of 1. So you'll see this. That's just what our unit circle is because our radius is 1 unit. We're going to use it and a lot of the pieces of it in several chapters down the road, just an introduction to what a unit circle is. So here's our example, right? We're asked to write the standard form of the equation of the circle with a radius 5 and my center at -3, 6. So in order to do that, I found my radius was 5, my h was a -3, and my k was 6. And I was told that because my center here is a -3, 6. So now that I have those, I just plug those into my equation. So my h and my k and my r. And then I simplify. So when I have an x minus a -3, that becomes x plus 3, y minus 6, and I square that radius. So I have x plus 3 squared plus y minus 6 squared equals 25. So now we're going to be graphing our circle. So here I'm asked to graph this circle. So the first thing I want to do is I want to find my center, and then I want to find what my radius is. Because once I have those two things, I can easily plot those on my graph. So let's see what we do here. So I always want to have my x minus and my y minus, right? So once I rewrite my equation in this form where I have my x minus and my y minus, I can go ahead and deal with the square root of my constant term because that will give me my radius. Now I have my h and my k and my radius. So now I know that my center is at -3, 2. And my radius is going to be 4. So now I just plot this point and I find my radius of 4 and I can graph that entire circle. So now I'm asked to find the intercepts because oftentimes our circles will intercept either the x-axis or the y-axis, and sometimes that data can be very useful to us, so we have to find the intercepts. Okay, so just follow this one little step at a time. So I want to find the x-intercepts first. So if I find the x-intercepts, I set y equal to 0. So once y becomes 0, I can continue to simplify from there, right? So I still have my x plus 3 squared. 0 minus 2 is a -2. And when I square that -2, it becomes a +4 equals 16. Well, now I can just get this term all by itself by subtracting 4 and then take the square root of both sides. And when I take the square root, remember I have to have this plus minus. Just kind of live in that land. When I take the square root, I have to have plus minus. And then I subtract 3 from both sides. And here, when I go from the square root of 12 to this 2 times the square root of 3, that's just simplifying. And we'll spend some time doing this in a little bit later. So these are my two x-intercepts. -3 plus 2 times the square root of 3, and -3 minus 2 times the square root of 3. And we can go ahead and put those in the calculator and actually get the decimal approximation. So now to find the y-intercepts, if I have any, I turn x into 0, right? So once my x becomes 0, I can go through it and solve it the exact same way I just did. So I end up with 3 squared, y minus 2 squared stays the same. So I'll subtract my 9 from both sides and end up with y minus 2 squared equals 7. take the square root, and again, there's our plus and minus, and then add 2. So again, I have 2 plus the square root of 7 and 2 minus the square root of 7, which I put in my calculator and end up with those decimal approximations. So when I'm finding the intercepts, I just pick one variable and make it 0 and then solve for the other one. So now we're going to be looking at the general form of my equation of a circle. So here is the general form, right? So I've got my x squared plus y squared plus ax plus by plus c equals 0. So you'll see in my general form I have a 0 over here on the other side of my equal sign. Okay? And I don't have anything in parentheses. So when I look at this equation, it's really hard to graph it. Like I can't picture where my center is and where I'm going. So now we're going to go back into my other form to make it easier. Okay? So we can be given these equations in this form and still work with it. Okay? So here's what we do. First, I group all of my terms. So I group my x's together, and I group my y's together, and I get my constant over to the other side of the equal sign. So all I'm doing is just shuffling the order. So now I'm completing the square. Now hopefully you've heard that before, heard those words before. So how I complete the square is I take this term, this constant, this number with my x and with my y, so not with my squared terms, I divide it by 2 and square it. So this 4 divided by 2 and square it goes here. So this negative 6 divided by 2, square it goes here. But when I add those values to the one side of the equation, I have to also add those values to the other side of the equation. So that I can't forget that step as well. So then from there I can factor it. So the cool thing when I'm factoring it is this part right here, this 4 divided by 2 becomes this piece. This negative 6 divided by 2 becomes this piece right here. So that's an easier way to kind of find what goes in here. And then I can just simplify and add all these constants on the right side of my equation together. So now I have my standard form. So I can see that it's going to be x minus a negative 2 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 1 squared. So now I have the center at negative 2, 3, and the radius is 1. So I was able to take my general form and convert it to standard form to find the center and radius, which will help me graph it. So now I've graphed it. So we always graph the center first. We find the points that are 1 unit because our radius was 1 away, and we connect them and we graph our circle. Okay, we can also use a graphing calculator or Desmos to graph my circles. So the thing with Desmos or your graphing calculator is it always has to be in y equals format. So in order to do that, I have to solve for my y. Okay, so that's what we did here. But once I do that, I have to have 2 parts because remember when I take the square root of something, I have to have a positive, and then I also have to have a negative. And often your graphing calculator and Desmos will not do that automatically for you. So we have to graph the 2 different pieces of this. We have to graph the positive side and the negative side. But once you do that, you will have your entire circle. Okay, so let's look back at our learning targets. First, we were writing the standard form of the equation of a circle using our h and k. We're going to use h and k a lot, and h and k is always the center or the vertex, the main part of our function. So here that h and k was the center. Then we graphed those circles, and we worked with the general form. So when we go from general form to standard form, we are going to be completing the square. So make sure that you can follow along and do that. So now that you've worked through these learning targets, go ahead and work on your homework for the section that we're working on, 1.4.